Welcome to the Finding Magic podcast, where we talk about structured intuition, creativity, and magic, as discussed in my book, Getting into the Flow. And we learn from our guests' stories. And this helps us broaden our view of reality and understand how magic is created and sensed so that we can realize our true potential and create our lives as purposeful and powerful and from an inspired and joyful place. I'm Vincent, your host. Let's get into it. And welcome to this episode. It's the 10th in the interview series. And today I'll be interviewing Michelle Steiner and inviting her to share a story of magic showing up in her life. Now, Michelle's from Pennsylvania and lives with an invisible disability and works as a para-educator in a school with students also with disabilities. She's had articles published in both literary and disability-focused publications and has also had her photographs featured there. And it seems that part of the magic of this podcast is that stories around a particular life situation seem to show up consecutively in a bunch. We had a couple of successive episodes with different stories about getting onto an African safari recently. And now the podcast has moved on to synchronicities in finding spouses, finding love. And last time Kate told us how she found her husband. And today, Michelle's going to tell us about a time when she met the man who ultimately became her husband. Michelle, it's great to have you on the podcast. And thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's so wonderful to be here today.
Okay, well, let's make a start. If you could tell us a little bit about the background to what happened. Where did you start? Yeah.
Sure. I met my husband when I was it was totally unexpected. I was not planning it, and neither was he. I was volunteering at our art center, and I think I went to grab dinner, and he saw me walking down the street. I had a red dress on, and he said, "Wow, who is that girl in that red dress? I wonder where she's going." And it turns out we were going to the same place. I was volunteering that night at the art center, and he was coming to play open mic with his guitar. And when we first hit them, it turns out we knew mutual friends, and we had the same interests. And when we look at our story, we were both in the same place at certain times where we just were blind to each other. And there was just so many things that we're saying that we were meant to be together. And one of the key things is, years before I even met him, I was at the same place at the art center. And I had a friend's husband that asked me, "So are you seeing anybody?" I said, "Oh, no, I'm single." And I was really struggling at that point. I really didn't have a lot of, leads on people. It just seemed like I had a lot of duds. And he said, "You just might meet somebody here." And little did I know that many years later, that is exactly where I would meet somebody at. And that was one of the first things that was predicted.
Yeah.
In meeting him. And yeah, so there was the initial meeting. And then there was years later. Right before I did that, I had a friend that told me he had a dream. And he goes, "You got married and you were standing in front of the courthouse and you had on a vintage wedding dress." Now, the vintage wedding dress, I would say, okay, that's definitely my style. But I'm like, why would I be in front of the courthouse? And who is this guy?
Mm.
And when we had our wedding reception, it was at the art center where we met. And then afterwards, the photographer said, "Hey, do you want to go on a little walk and take some pictures?" And we went to a park, and right in the background, when we got our pictures back, was the courthouse. So
Wow.
there was just like these things that we were just meant to be together. But I didn't know that at the time.
I'm just going to break in there. I'm just really curious. You said
Uh-huh.
that your paths had crossed a number of times. You'd have had a number of
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to
Yeah.
connect, and perhaps you can just dig into or give us an example of some of those times.
Sure. There was a poetry reading years ago when
Yeah.
I first started out at community college. And my name wasn't in the brochure because I responded late. And it turns out, years later, I showed my husband, he was at the same reading. In fact, he showed me the brochure and I said, hey, I read it this thing, but my name wasn't in it. And it was so late and it was the exact date. And he was there and he was seeing somebody else, and him and his ex, they had a fight that day, I think. And I
Oh,
think he spilled coffee and I didn't even notice this because I was just so like just trying to get ready to read. And I was also, of course, wondering, oh, am I ever going to meet somebody? Well, little did I know that he was there. There was also this meeting that we had, a writing meeting, and people swore that he was there. We were there at the same time, and it was this teeny room, a teeny apartment above a bookstore. And I can just remember maybe a shadow of seeing him or somebody that might have been him, but it was like I was blind to seeing him in this little room. Or he might have been there on a day I wasn't there. I can't remember, but I think we were in the same place. And it's just like we were at, yeah, those places together. So those were two places that we were at, and we just were blind to each other.
right. Thank you. So you met at the art center. What happened
Yes.
after that?
Well, he was in between jobs that summer. So he was staying with his mom for a little bit, and he would come home once. Then he found another job. So he would, all summer he came back to where I lived at, to the art center when we had our open mics once a month. Well, we had them more often, but he came once a month, and he got to know me. And I was really blind to the fact that he liked me. Everybody else around could see that he liked me, except for me. I kind of got a little feeling about that. Okay, maybe this guy does like me. And but I didn't want to get ahead of myself. I thought, I've been burned in the past. Let's just see if we're going to be friends, and at the very end, at least I'll end up with a really good friend. And I didn't know this, but he was also asking about me that summer. He was asking one of my sweet friends, a good friend of his, hey, what about Michelle? And his friend didn't know too much about me, but he was asking around, and everybody could see that he was smiling. And anytime I turned my head, he would turn his head in my direction. And everyone's like, oh yeah, he really has it for her. And I can remember he was also very quiet, very shy. And it was during Labor Day weekend around the end of August. He came to open mic, and he sang a song about a girl that got away because they were both really bashful. And one of my friends said, oh, you better not let the next one get away. And he goes, oh, I won't. So he sat down beside me. He goes, can I have your email address? And I said, sure. And I thought, okay, this guy isn't going to email me. It's just not going to happen. And when I went back, I was in college at the time. And when I went back to college, sure enough, there was an email that Monday or that Tuesday when I went back in. And it was a friendly email. It wasn't anything really major. We just got to know each other a little bit better. And he came home around Thanksgiving, and he's like, oh, so how often do you check your email and everything? And I'm like, oh, I checked this other account. And then he emailed me, but I didn't check it until like a day or two afterwards. And he went back home because he lived a couple hours away, and he had his number there. And I'm like, my mom, oh, should I call him? My mom goes, yeah, you should really call him. So I called him up, and he said, no. I said, well, are you seeing anybody? Because he was asking me out. And he's like, no, I'm not seeing anybody. And he goes, I'm going to come home for Christmas next month, and we should go out. And right before the day before Christmas Eve, we had our first date, and we've just been together ever since.
Oh, that's a lovely story. That's a
Thank you.
lovely story. Hey, are there any lessons that you've learned about how this kind of magically came together that partly that, it seems that the universe was kind of pushing you together and trying to push you together until eventually it's
Yes.
done. So are there any lessons that you've taken from that?
I think one of the biggest lessons was patience, because sometimes I would get in relationships and I would try to push something that wasn't there, or somebody else would try to push something,
Yeah.
and it just didn't work out. And I think that I used to always wonder and think, oh, am I ever going to meet somebody? And it was just that patience, that time, and also keeping my eyes open for things too. I think that was the biggest thing too. Just seeing like how things do connect, and just, but it goes back to just being patient, and there's just certain things you can't plan. I know sometimes we live in this society where we think, oh, I'm going to go on whatever dating service is on, and I'm going to find the ideal person, and people don't do that, or they're going to go to church and they think they're going to find somebody, and
Right.
people do. But that just wasn't my story.
Mm.
It was like the universe just smiled. And when I finally took off all that pressure on myself and thinking, oh, I got to find somebody by the time I'm this age, or I really need to find somebody, and am
Right.
I going to be happy alone? And by the time I found him, I was already back to school. I was living with my parents again, but I figured I can be really happy if I'm single.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that last bit? We lost a bit of sound there.
Sure. I was at that point where I said I could be happy
Mm.
being single, or I could be happy with being somebody,
Mm.
or meeting somebody and being with them. And I was just really happy that it worked out that way.
Great, fantastic. And would you say there's any lessons that you learned or that you wish you'd had in hindsight around awareness of what was going on?
I think I just wish I had awareness that the universe was giving me signs, and to just to pay attention, and to just be patient and to wait for that. I think that was the biggest thing, because sometimes something will happen that maybe I want to have, or something, and I might just get some signs. I might just say, okay, well, I'm going to look and I'm going to listen. So I might get a sign about just something, like I'll see a lot of things that might be related to that. And I'm thinking, okay, I think this might happen, but I don't know. But I try to be open to what is going on.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much for the story, Michelle. So, if people want to stay in touch with you and see your work as it unfolds, where can they find you?
You can find me at my blog, www.mrsmichellesmission.com.
And perhaps you can just tell us a little bit more about your mission, the kind of
Sure.
elevator pitch.
I Sure, I'd be happy to. I have a learning disability. So, a lot of my mission is to encourage, empower, and educate people with and without learning disabilities. And I do that with a number of different things. I do that with my writing. Number one, I love to write. I've always loved to write ever since I was a little girl. And I also love photography. I love to take pictures on my walks because I can't drive because of my disability. And I just love, though, that the universe shows me flowers and so many beautiful things in nature. And I get that chance when I don't have a ride to be able to literally stop and smell the roses. And I could be sad about that, but there's so many details that I would miss. And I also sometimes I tie them in with my articles, and I also post them on my store that's on my website as well.
Great, thank you. And can you give me the website again?
www.mrsmichellesmission.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michelle. So, look,
Thank
if you'd
you.
like to learn more about Michelle and her work and you missed hearing that link, or if you'd like to learn more about me and my work and finding magic, because there's only so much we can cover in an episode, please head over to my website at vincentgmelling.com, and you'll see a podcast button at the top, and that will take you to links to access the full list of podcast episodes. And for Michelle's interview, that will include a link to all the resources that she's shared with me. The page has also, as I said, got a full list of podcast episodes. It's got a list of the podcast platforms where you can get them, and a link for you to join the discussions of the episodes. And if you'd love to share your story of magic on the podcast, I'd love to hear. And there's a link for that too. On the website, there's another button for you to get my book, Getting Into the Flow. And finally, there's a button for you to engage with me, whether it's through coaching, whether it's through the trainings and events I offer, or whether it's just to contact me. So here's the website again, vincentgmelling.com. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to the local birds and the golf course. And thankfully, the builders next door have finished their work and we don't have sound effects anymore. So thank you and catch you in the next episode.